I was talking to people, what constitutes peaceful topics? I know that I almost never get in fights with people about cognitive functions, although Bo and I have a little back and forth because he insists he's an INTP, even though he's obviously to me an ENTP. But, I can see that he knows himself better than I know him, so I give him, officially he's right, but other than that, though, I never seem to have any disputes about cognitive functions. Other topics that are non-confrontational, non-disputionary.
Do you find that you spend a lot of time engaged in confrontational topics in a logical format, like rhetorical or debate-based format?
Well, I mean, here in talking with famous people, I would say the majority of the conversations I have are not arguments. They're not debates. But when it gets political, if it's not a debate, then it's not interesting. It's just two people agreeing with each other.
Yeah, true.
Argumentation can also be harmful, right? It's not always important to have the right justification for something when something action is more important. I understand you get mad at advocating the right thing for the wrong reason, but it can still be the right thing. Well, okay, but then if it is the right thing, then there is a right reason for it. That's the point. Is if in fact what you're advocating is right, then you're just not making the right arguments yet. Well, then we need to figure out what the right arguments to make are.
So what if those arguments don't fit inside a rhetorical framework?
Well, then they'll break down. They'll break down. And the thing is, as a public policy,
within that framework, they will. Yeah, but like
right.
But if you leave that framework and like most of the world isn't conducted,
we're talking about public policy. We're talking about public policy. Okay, so if Wobble, if you're saying it's not always important to have the right justification for something when some action is more important, I'm talking about individuals acting in their individual lives, I agree with you. I agree. But if you're talking about public policy, then absolutely not, because if you are saying that sometimes we have to do the right action even though we don't have the right justification for it, well, either somebody needs to come up with the right justification really quickly, or it's not the right action.
Why quickly? Why in a rush?
Yeah, I mean, why are you in a rush? But I understand sometimes action is important. Sometimes we got to take action right away. Then come up with the right justification. If you allow for public policy to be passed by individuals whose arguments for why it should be passed don't withstand any muster, then it doesn't matter. Then first of all, you have no reason to believe that in fact it's the right thing to do. If you can't explain why it's the right thing to do, you have no reason to believe it is the right thing to do.
What if you just feel it?
That's
what I mean. It doesn't.
Right, you could just feel it.
It doesn't fit within a debate framework, but
the problem is your feelings aren't a reason for us all to be compelled to follow your action. That's what public policy is.
Well, unless everybody feels it, though. What if everybody feels it?
It doesn't matter, because that's why we need a limiting principle other than appeal to popular sentiment. Appeal to popular sentiment is a possible limiting principle, but it's not a good one because it fails reciprocal burdens, because you wouldn't want to be subject to X if it was popular. Right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So that's why that's not a good limiting mechanism. So the answer to the question, Wobble, is this. If you don't know why it's the right thing to do, then it's probably not the right thing to do. If you do know why, but that answer doesn't withstand scrutiny, then it's not why. And if it is the right thing to do, then you need to find out why, or else you shouldn't be believing that it is the right thing to do.
Why not? That's a good one. How come?
Well, because you're advocating for other people. You're not advocating for yourself. You're advocating for other people, what other people should be forced to do. And you shouldn't arbitrarily do that. If you don't know why other people should be forced to do something, you shouldn't point guns at them.
I mean, I think. Well, Adam, if you want to address this here.
Let's go ahead. I ended that last video without checking chat and realized that Wobble had a comment on it, so I wanted to let's just do another brief one here. Follow up on it. What do you think, Tanner?
Yeah, so Wobble just said here, I think he's kind of towing a similar line that I am, so he says, he or she, I don't know. So debate is the most important thing in public policy, right? Not in the world. So I don't want to put words in their mouth.
True. You got me. Okay, you got me. It's not the most important thing in the world. It's the most important thing for the world, but it's not the most important thing in the world.
Oh, I might. How do you know? I mean, if
Well,
it's
because everything else isn't for the world; it's for individuals or small groups or something like that. The only thing that helps the world is a fair, reciprocal burdens approach to policymaking.
mm, and by world, you just mean like collective
To the
engagement with other
extent that
people.
any society applies this more than they currently are, it
Yeah.
improves things.
Okay. But isn't it kind of weird? So I don't. So is I don't know the specifics of too much of this, but is yours a libertarian framework?
Well, I prefer
Largely.
not to. I prefer not to go with the labels, but yeah, it is largely a libertarian framework with some
Yeah.
substantial
Okay.
differentiations, including on environmental issues. I do think that the federal government has a role in passing environmental legislation, and even I think property taxes are okay. I think that land monopolies need to be, as a group, needs to deal with the reality of land monopolies, quantity, not value.
Okay. So the reason why I ask is because I like libertarianism in my relatively naive understanding of it is really just emancipation of the individual. Um, and so I always find it a bit ironic, and again, this isn't to put words in your mouth, but when I see a libertarian position being taken, I always find it ironic that they're referring to collective engagements because there's really no motivation to engage with the collective or really to pay any respects to them.
See, that's my point. Is that respect for community means understanding that you cannot respect the community without respecting individual rights, because communities are made up of individuals, and to think that there's a community benefit that is bad for individuals but good for the community is to presume that your vision of the community is the vision of the community.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I think what is then difficult for me to engage with in this, actually, with respect to what we're talking about here, I think, is this the video about debate being the most important thing in the world or something like that?
Yeah.
So is that you're saying like it's got to be what's best for the individual, because the group is a collection of individuals, and so many people are disinterested in debating or enriching their own debate skills that there has to be an affordance for people who want to do what is right and want to know what is right, but don't want to go through a rhetorical, logical process to get there.
Okay. Well, I mean, in my opinion, there's plenty of ways to do what's good and right in life that aren't political. For example, this is a perfect libertarian community. It's entirely consensual in every regard. It's not even scheduled, right? So
yeah.
you can't you can't make a reservation to be on Talking with Famous People because I don't know when the fuck I'm going to go on, right? And anybody's welcome to come on and decide what the topic's going to be and basically run that episode of the thing. You know, if you come in and say, I want to talk about this, I say, well, tell us all about it. And then it'll devolve into various people talking. That's fine. I don't care. There's no rules, you know? There are some rules, but they're not rules even. They're like, don't be a douchebag. Don't be like, talk shit about women and stuff like that. But then I'll just mock you until you go away. I won't like kick you out or anything.
So you've introduced an interesting binding that I know what breaking it will beckon elitism, but would you say that consensus or like free will, the will of the individual is equated with what is best for them? Like when you said like this form right here is consensual.
No, I'm not saying it's perfect is what's best for them. I'm saying that it's better than a non-consensual community. Because
okay, and how do you know that?
Well, because to say anything else is to assume I know what's best for somebody else.
Yeah, but like for example, with infants who can't exhibit their own free will.
Okay, well, look,
if we threw them in a purely free will environment, so that's you know.
There's the issue of consent. Okay, consent does require certain elements to be met for it to be legitimate consent, and one of them is, being sane and sober, being informed adequately to make a decision about a certain thing, and being of age. And the reason we have of age is because it's generally presumed that if you're under a certain age, you lack the other elements that are necessary to make informed consent. So I assume that everybody in this room is capable of making informed consent, and if they aren't even, they aren't consenting to anything except listening to us talk to each other. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
So with respect to yeah, I agree with you. So with respect to public policy, how do we take care of people who do not meet requiring the prerequisites for consents?
well, I mean, we already have plenty of policies in place to deal with that. It depends on the circumstances. If there's some sort of medical emergency and you're in a coma, you have somebody like an arbiter talk on your behalf or something like that.
But I mean, are those? I can imagine a lot of those. Well, as far as I know, right, they would all come through the current political system,
Right.
and a
Well,
lot of those would have to do with
appropriate. Issues of consent are appropriate matters for public policy because obviously we need to define limits to a pure rights framework, or else parents wouldn't have any obligation to take care of their infants. I'm not
yeah.
I'm not impractical. I'm not a demagogue. I understand that there are compromises to be made along these vectors, and you might point out, well, then Eric, isn't it just as arbitrary as anything else? But I would say no, because this is a matter of the process. Adjudicate through this framework first, because it's what the most real framework. It's like when we pass a law that
Just
that
not
actually,
when it comes to people who can't consent, right?
well, okay, put it this way. Passing it through this framework means attending to the matter of consent. So it means to correctly adjudicate the negative rights framework means having legislative actions that attend to the fact that newborn babies need additional support, stuff like that, right? So that's not a contradiction per se. Rather, it's the reality that yes, there's always going to be the devil in the details thing. The nice thing about this framework is the devil in the details requires the least amount of arbitrary, subjective decision making. It doesn't require none, but it limits it so it collapses in rather than out.
But the alternative way to look at that is that it has infinite number of devils in details when it comes to what it can't speak to, which are like public policy concerns about people who can't consent, and a lot of that, right, is like one of the tenets or prerequisites you said was that people are informed. So I would say even if people are of age and are not drugged up or in a coma or whatever, like almost none of them are informed. So
we're not trying to impose anything on them. We're not trying to get them to consent to anything.
right, but I think now, well, we are, because we're in the form of public policy, right? We're trying to come up with a policy that gets people to abide by something.
Right, but my point is that we need to adjudicate those public policies through this framework so that we prioritize not forcing non-consensual shit on people that's not justified. It's justified to cause violence on somebody if you're seeking justice for another person, not if you're seeking to enforce a rule that is there despite the fact that no harm's been done. Then you're the one creating harm.
I'm with you on that. Yeah, I'm with you on that, but I think now what's happening is that you are still giving, it is implied that you know what is best for people, because this is a case where even non-infants, just people who aren't informed, it means they can't give in consent, right? If you're not informed, you can't give in consent.
Consent to what?
So,
let's talk about to what. What am I supposed to ask
consent
to?
To whatever is forwarded as a particular public policy. And you're saying,
that's the point. The limit of the public policy is important in determining this. You can't ask this question without focusing on what are the limits of public policy. What's within the jurisdiction of public policy or not. So I don't know what you're advocating for. What are you advocating for that
for example, okay, let's pick a particular, let's choose, for example, legalizing marijuana. So legalizing marijuana. So we don't have it yet here in Canada, but we're real close, okay? And how do you decide who is informed? And therefore, who is able to consent to debate and inform that public policy?
You don't decide if someone else is informed, or everyone gets to debate it. Okay, everyone gets to debate it. The point is, which arguments are strongest and which ones are going to win. If your argument is we should not allow those people to smoke marijuana because they're not informed enough to make the decision, then you are not making an issue of consent. An issue of consent would be saying, let's define consent as such so that if you want to smoke marijuana, you have to prove you're consenting by meeting this mechanism. That would be legislation regarding consent. Now,
so
that's not what you're talking about. You're assuming a lack of consent.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it's because it's interesting, because I think when you say it's the best arguments that win, right? I can just imagine the majority of people not being able to engage in what would be a truly optimal argumentation. Right?
Well, that's why the world is as it is. But I'm trying to change that.
I see. I see.
I mean,
Okay.
I'm not claiming I'm going to solve all these problems. I'm saying I'm going to try to help.
No,
a little bit.
now I gotcha. I gotcha. Okay. So it's not, this reminds me of, you were talking one time about an INFJ at a debate, and you said like they won the debate, but they didn't have the best arguments or something because the INFJ is so concerned about instantiating something, manifesting something, and regardless of whether or not it's actually optimal, in terms of its like rhetorical rigor and thoroughness. This reminds me of that in the sense that I have been trying to understand how any of your stuff works since it won't work in the real world, but that's because I'm coming from that reference frame of my definition of optimal is what can be manifest. So now that this is why I keep asking these questions, because it's not that so now I can understand.
My policy advocacies are distinct from my metaphysical advocacies. It's important to understand that too. I do have concrete policy advocacies, and I say why they should be in place. They're very concrete. In fact, I plan to run for president, and I don't know if I'm going to win, but I plan to win. And when I do win, I'm going to try to implement the policies that I very specifically lay out ahead of time. However, my metaphysical plan is much more vague. It's having conversations like this and promoting the notion that it matters whether or not you equivocate on the term consent, as you did. That's the argument you were making there, was an equivocation on consent, which is fine. But it matters whether that's what happened or whether something else happened. And whether that's what happened or something else happened is a real question with a single right answer to it.
Okay. So then the next thing that isn't really aligned for me yet is when you talk about policy, public policy as a means to really accomplish or preclude goodness, right? Like what is good for people?
No, I see public policy as the application of the government's monopoly on use of force.
And how would you prefer to see that used?
As responsive only, ideally, or as close to it as possible. There are certain circumstances in which we have to make exceptions.
And for what end? Why would you use it responsibly?
Well, because we have a legitimate cause in terms of justice. If somebody kills your sister to get revenge, that's legitimate revenge. Justice has that element to it. If you don't like that, fine, nix that. Then we at least have legitimacy on a grounds that society ought take some action to show that it disallows those sort of behaviors. And
what is the
and the
why,
action should
why
be proportional
value
to the significance with which we place on that.
Yeah, and why value justice? What is the utility
Well, because
of it?
each of us is born owning our own bodies. That's the core axiom. So with that self-ownership, everything else logically follows. It's a fairly complex logical chain, but it is sound.
Yeah, and I suppose I'm less interested in the logical chain itself, and I don't dispute and I don't doubt even that it's sound, but I'm wondering what is your motivation for even constructing the chain? Why do you care to argue for the value of justice?
Well, I am a moral absolutist in a couple of different ways. On a personal level, I am a theist as well as an atheist. So I have theistic reasons to affirm the good. On an individual biological level, I'm highly empathetic, but not very emotional. What I mean by highly empathetic but not very emotional is I burst into emotion frequently. I cry all the time. Burst into tears when I'm saying something. If I'm saying something evocative like I was earlier, this teenager asked me to make a video about how to run a school, how to own a school. And at the end of it, I said, well, the only real thing that matters is you have to care. You have to care way more than anybody else. And it made me emotional saying it, right? That's called not being emotional. That's called being empathetic. I have a lot of empathy in general. I feel like if an animal gets hurt, I burst into tears. Delilah, my daughter, burst into tears when we got a piece of mail that was addressed to the cat. Why? I don't know. It's an ENTP thing. We're a little crazy like that. But the point is, that's another reason why I want to do good. But most importantly, I think ENTPs, as a general rule, but me specifically, I was raised in a very fair, good, healthy, nurturing environment. My parents loved the shit out of me, and they were always fair. Like, if they were wrong, they said, okay, you got a point there, I'm wrong. You know? And vice versa. I was taught that that was the most important virtue, objective self-criticism. We're not interested in hearing you defend your wrongness, Eric. Be objective. So it's a personal value. And when I went out in the world and I discovered that the world is not nearly as fair as my world was, it offends me. That's why.
Yeah, I get that. That sounds good to me.
Okay, so that's my thoughts on that whole thing. And thank you, Tanner, for asking such good questions and everything. Let's
Cheers.
talk about the next thing, which is the MBTI question that we were going to get to.